Good afternoon. Welcome everybody. And I want to tell you that today, you will be able to see very interesting presentation, that will allow us to see the invisible. We are talking about the fact, that our eyes see in a very narrow spectrum of solar electromagnetic radiation. Therefore, we can see on the picture, where the sun penetrates through the crowns. The perspective itself is, what is happening on the shell of the sun. On the right, we see a thermal portrait of the body of a woman in a circle, in the symbol of the Vitruvian Man. So we will discuss with you the problem, that we have solved by combining VedaPulse diagnostics with infrared, that is hard energy and diagnostics. To your attention is screening, dynamics, and monitoring. Let's get started. Nothing will be more competent than to rely on the science of the past. The statement of Nicolas Ruric, which I saw recently, simply struck me: build the steps of the future from ancient wonderful stones. This is a portrait of Nicolas Ruric. Accordingly, some paintings from his museum and the road to the Uman Valley, in the Altai, where he had been. And this was a very important moment for us. In the 11th century, the great Arab scholar, Avicenna wrote in his medical poem, "Among the causes are the fire of mental anguish, hard work, fatigue of the legs and hands, anger and resentment, putrefaction and hunger, cold that clogged the pores of the skin. The disease can be born as a cold that may break the continuity. The body grows cold, lo and behold, life is extinguished, like a flame in a lamp where the oil has run out." Avicenna foresaw the problems of a human in the 11th century. And this requires registration of the body's thermal portrait. I saw very good pictures from the 6th reference edition Color Atlas of Physiology, which I came across in St. Petersburg, about the thermal radiation of a single-celled organism. With all the other selections and perceptions that are there, including human beings. Heat is released through the human skin. These are ATP reactions that occur inside the mitochondria. And as a result, we see that a person should be at an average temperature of about 36.5 degrees and a little higher or a little lower. The existence of thermal radiation beyond the visible spectrum was discovered by William Herschel in 1800. 220 years ago. The uniqueness of this man was that he was an astronomer, optician, and composer. Here is his portrait. And here, he is using a thermometer placed behind the red section of the solar spectrum, when radiation passes through a dispersing prism. He researched why telescopes heat up when exposed to sunlight. He actually discovered infrared, which obeys the same laws as visible light. Here I gave an example of the founders of Russian thermal imaging. Where are we without our great Lomonosov? He invented night vision tube, and he saw the contours of ships with its help. Nowadays, the founder of the Russian thermal imaging is Dr. Miroshnikov, head of the Optical Institute. Moscow School Dr. Lichterman, Dr. Kolosov, Novosibirsk specialist in thermal imaging. And the author of the Thermal Imager, head of the SVET Thermal Imager Creation Group. Interpretation of SVET is Semiconductor Vision Infrared Thermograph. Please note that Miroshnikov created mechanical thermal imagers in Russia almost 40 years ago. Here are Slovaks. And here we see a photo of a girl, and please pay attention to the thermal portrait of this girl. In the 60s and 70s, it was a black and white image. We didn't have computers yet, we were just beginning to enter the era of digital technology. And this was done by us. Here we are filming the thermal navigation of a brain tumor. Here is a brain tumor, shown below, which can only be seen with a thermal imager. In order to understand and describe what thermal radiation and thermography are in general, Dr. Borden, his portrait is on the left, offered me to create a charter. It is published in a foreign journal and is accepted all over the world. The basis of medical thermal imaging is a deep connection of temperature gradients on the human skin, with the processes occurring in the body. The essence of the thermographic method consists in presenting a person, doctor, with a visualized infrared image, created on the surface of the body due to the work of the autonomic nervous system, which causes a change in blood filling in the subcutaneous vascular network, in areas, reflexogenic zones, corresponding to a particular internal organ. Therefore, it is not the structural features of internal organs that are visualized, as is the case with ultrasound, X-ray and other methods of active radiation diagnostics, but functional changes that carry information about any normal and pathological processes in the body. This determines the cause of early diagnosis of complex diseases. I would like to underline that these studies are excellent because, first of all, they are distant, and they do not cause either the patient or the doctor any radiation load that could harm, such as X-rays, or strong magnetic fields, etc. Here I purposely showed a medical thermography project, that was developed and demonstrated at various international technological development forums from 2010 to 2013. And as a result, we were awarded for creating medical thermography. This is PR in some way. Nevertheless, there is such a business project for the development of medical thermography. What is medical thermal imaging? Unlike other methods of instrumental diagnostics, ultrasound methods of investigation, ultrasound, X-ray computed tomography, nuclear magnetic resonance tomography, IR thermography is not in demand yet. Since small cameras that would not be very expensive have not yet been developed, here you can see a thermal imaging camera. And here it is well shown how it was in the 60s. Accordingly, this is a single-element photo-receiving device, mechanical. And here you can see the matrix ones. Imagine that there are 16,000 thermometers in this matrix, but there are already 300,000 thermometers in this one. Here's an example of applying a special gel. Demonstration of back temperature changes. Before. Problems can be seen very clearly on a person. Apply the gel. And after an hour, we see how the temperature surface of the back skin has changed, in particular, here. It is very important. The most important thing is that it can be digitized. Here is another interesting piece of information about thermal navigation. Test therapy helps in relieving pain in athletes before training. Pay attention that this is the place of complaints that the athlete had before training. We used test therapy and as a result contained that pain syndrome. We can see that the asymmetric image was transformed into a symmetric one. He had a serious race, 180 kilometers in the Altai Mountains, and finally he finished it with no pain. Here we can observe the use of quantum therapy and test therapy to reduce the volume of the keloid scar after the endoprosthetic surgery of the right knee joint. You can see it clearly here. This is a photo, and this is a thermal portrait of this area. And then, in fact, a year later, we saw that the keloid scar was no longer visible. But nevertheless, we can see the temperature field. Dynamics of temperature changes when taking a bath from dehydrated marl blood. In Altai, the author of this technology is Dr. Shabalin, and his patient was our well-known Buren program manager, Falk. Here's a thermal portrait of his back. He clearly has scoliosis. But after taking a bath, he is already standing up straight. This means that we stopped the muscle pains that were bending his back so much. It demonstrates that thermal imaging shows us invisible problems in humans. A study was conducted at the Moscow Regional Research Clinical Institute, named after Vladimirsky. This is a person who has a vibration hands disease. They took a picture of him. At the same time, we made thermal portraits of the hands. We saw that he had obvious problems. But when we performed quantum therapy in combination with gel, we saw how blood filling and microcirculation changed in 15 minutes. This is a method for treatment. Thermal navigation allows screening monitoring. This is a promising avenue. Changing dynamics in facial temperature in case of cephalgia. This patient was brought to me by a doctor from Mongolia. She is diagnosed with cephalgia. He wanted to use acupuncture. I was offered to make her screening before. Note that this was performed before the procedure. Then she underwent acupuncture all over her body. Notice how much the face's temperature field has changed. And after. The time is indicated at the bottom. And then we see how her face temperature has changed dramatically. We removed the muscle spasms. Pay attention to the portrait. She already has a completely different emotional state. What conclusions can be drawn? The refraction of light on raindrops creates rainbows, and nature shows us that daylight consists of a spectrum of different wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. Human infrared radiation can be seen with a thermal imager, and since 1 kilogram of a person emits on Earth 4 times more than a kilogram of the Sun in the IR spectrum, it means that human infrared radiation carries a huge amount of information about their adaptation mechanisms to the environment and characterizes their health. Here you can see the entire range of electromagnetic radiation, from gamma radiation to long electromagnetic waves. And this is a narrow spectrum in which we live. And we believe that we can see everything. But outside, in this part of the long waves and in this one, we see almost nothing. Only with the help of devices. Generally, in order to promote these technologies, we used, first of all, the competence of the founder of the Siberian branch of the Academy of Medical Sciences, academician Kazhnashayev. I was very much supported by Dr. Borodin, an academician and founder of the Institute of Lymphology. Saratov School, Doctor of Science Braille, Dr. Kristoforov, author of Quantum Medicine, and Dr. Klebanov, a department employee at the Second Medical Institute in Moscow. Without their help, we would have been dealing with these issues for a very long period. Finally, we come to the topic called thermography for wellness professionals. Dr. Ruric offered me to collaborate and use thermal imaging to correlate with research in the field of heart rate variability. Here's an examination of a patient who was in Cuba. I shot him in 2015, but in 2019 he arrived, and we saw that he had very serious problems with his heart rhythm. Then we conducted the following experiment within our organization. We placed his right hand on a bag of snow. Please note that after 3 minutes, we saw the states of the meridians that are reflected on the hands, and clearly confirmed that he has problems of venous congestion and, as a result, sinus bradycardia, which we confirmed on the previous analysis. He went to Slovakia, where he had an ablation of the heart, because he had a very low rhythm, in the range of 37 to 40 beats per minute. He was also implanted a sinoatrial node. Here you can clearly see that thermal navigation helps us to navigate well, in those moments where there are some problems. This was the opening episode. Here is the example on my hand when I had pneumonia, and the doctors prescribed me an antibiotic twice per day, and a probiotic. I was taking everything accordingly, but I felt a manifestation of swelling of the hands. It is shown on the top shot. In VedaPulse diagnostics, in the description of the second meridian of the large intestine, it was written that pain along the tendons and joint capsule of the hands with limited mobility in the shoulder, elbow and carpal joints can be bothered. Then we applied the so-called gel, which improves microcirculation. And the bottom picture shows how the temperature of the hands has changed, how quickly the swelling has gone. It is best to do this on yourself, because you feel these results. The main sections of functional medicine in which thermal imaging diagnostics of patients is most effective are functional diagnostics of various inflammatory processes in internal organs and tissues, assessment of the degree of activity of pathological process in large joints and spine, rheumatoid arthritis, primary deforming osteoarthritis, scapulohumeral periarthritis, sacroiliitis, spondyloarthritis, spinal osteochondrosis, thermography of the degree of activity of pathological processes in the gastrointestinal tract, gastritis, duodenitis, pancreatitis, cholecystitis, hepatitis, hepatosis, colitis, thermography of vascular disorders, phlebitis, varicose veins, diabetic angiopathy, blood and lymph stasis, thermographic assessment of early disorders in the peripheral nervous system, polyneuropathies of various etiologies, breast thermography screening, examination of the mammary glands of women, in order to carry out preventive measures for mastopathy and other breast diseases, thermography of the bronchopulmonary system, pneumonia, bronchial asthma, pleurisy, pneumofibrosis, thermography of the urinary system, cystitis, pyelonephritis, urolithiasis, thermography of disorders in the reproductive system, fibroids, inflammatory processes. By the way, in this picture, if you zoom in, you can see the projection of the inflammatory process, fibroids. Express thermography of ENT diseases, maxillitis, frontitis, sinusitis. Thermal imaging control in sports medicine, physiotherapy, cosmetology. Experimental medicine, research of the influence of new dosage forms, physical factors, and functional physiological loads on the human body. So, thermal imaging is now a very famous area. With COVID, people have learned that temperature measurements are very important. You know that body temperature is measured at the entrance to the airport and other institutions distantly, using IR pyrometers. Guidelines for the use of thermal imaging in the practice of a specialist, in traditional healing systems. Bioenergetic thermography of the human biofield. Analysis of the effectiveness of holistic practices, based on temperature dynamics in projection zones associated with internal organs. Assessment of changes in hemodynamics in problem areas of the body during yoga, qigong, and therapeutic exercises. Visualization of the effectiveness of manual practices, massage, reiki, acupressure, cupping massage, by changing the temperature in the corresponding areas of the body. A very important section in the VedaPulse program is a recommendation on how to visit sauna for medicinal purposes, and the temperature field will tell you that it was effective. Now we move directly to thermography for wellness specialists. Thermal imager as part of the VedaPulse kit. The thermography software module is designed for obtaining images from a thermal imager, and analyzing thermograms in combination with ECG recordings. Here, as an example, the heart rate variability is shown. The thermal imager that we offer you is shown on a tripod. This is a very good bolometric thermal imager, which allows you to see the problems that I will describe below. Complete set of delivery. Here you can see it. If you have any questions, you can get advice by phone or on the website. To get started with the module, open the assessment, and go to the tab Results, Thermography. We immediately see the portrait. This is my thermal portrait, where you can already work. Tools and points that we marked here. We can see the temperature values digitally measured in degrees Celsius. Here on the left, for example, thermal imaging gallery is already shown. The toolbar. With a point tool we can move, click on the button and see the temperature field at this point. Lines, rectangular zones, ellipses, isotherms, temperature grid, and a panicle that removes markers. Here we have a temperature scale. This is necessary for analysis and diagnosis of diseases. And there are still possibilities. When we turn on the lines, we can see on line 1 a graph of temperatures from left to right. And a description. All parameters of line 1 are described. Accordingly, line 2 is vertical. And line 3. Here we have graphs. We also have histograms that allow us to clearly determine what our thermal camera recorded. When selecting the temperature grid tool, we take a line that we hover over the object, and then we can use the peripheral vertical lines to see the thermal symmetry. The lines will describe the temperature difference between the upper line and this line. Nose and under the lips, here we will see the temperature difference. This is important for osteopathy. The temperature grid for osteopathy is great. When selecting the Isotherms tool, there are certain areas that we would like to see. We click Isotherms, select these zones, and in the menu, you can see the average temperature of these zones. We can see how many pixels it takes up. You can see them at different points, and we clearly define these zones. Particularly here Zone 1 is the chin, and Zone 2 is the hotspot area near the lip. This is the 10th European Congress, in which we have actively participated. Reports were made from Novosibirsk Research Institute of Traumatology and Orthopedics, from ISTCI Microsurgery. I represented Siberian science there. And I can say that with the very strong support of Dr. Borodin, director of the Institute of Lymphology, who once headed the Commission on Public Health, and his support was very strong. I was very much supported by Kuznetshayev and Borodin. And now I work at the Institute of Lymphology. I just want to say that you deserve better. I'd like to stop on the fact that now, since we have very serious problems with coronavirus, medical thermography solves the big problems of total medical examinations. Because after undergoing COVID, a person has many health problems. With a total medical examination, the thermal imager allows you to solve the diagnostic issue, express diagnostics of clarifying the topical, differential diagnosis in various pathologies. Preventive, rapid tests, screening, nosological diagnostics of various diseases during examinations of the population. Tactical, correction of treatment programs and rehabilitation. And prognostic, monitoring the effectiveness of treatment, prognosis of possible complications, and disease outcomes. Now imagine that in 1956, for the first time, Lawson, a Canadian surgeon, used a thermal imager to detect breast cancer. And in such examinations, there are methods like palpation, mammography, computed tomography, ultrasound, and so on. All these methods are unsafe because X-ray tomography differs from fluorography by 200 times more dangerous. The load on a person from X-rays is 200 times stronger. Strong magnetic fields are also poorly examined. It is important to remember that ultrasound also has a very serious impact on cellular structures, the circulatory system and blood elements. We must proceed from the safety of diagnostics. And it is safe to do IR research. They are very informative, as you saw in the report. I would like to add that high-resolution thermal imaging diagnostics allows you to visually conduct real-time thermal navigation of the place and volume of the process, metrology of the dynamics of temperature changes during cold and pharmaceutical tests. The ongoing processes are performed by computer combination morphing in the results of structural studies photo images. The set of studies clearly demonstrates the effectiveness, harmlessness, comfort of disease detection, as well as monitoring the ongoing therapy of malignant, benign and hormonal diseases in real time. I would like to thank you for your attention and formulate suggestions. In Russia, this method has been used for a very long time, more than 40 years. Huge amount of work was done when there were no good and fast cameras yet. And now we have phones, smartphones, good telecommunications, and it is possible to transmit very quickly any picture. Every therapist, Every dentist, every specialist in the field of diagnostics must have a thermal imager on their table. And we need to create an atlas for them that will allow to determine the diseases of a person at a particular moment. In fact, with the help of thermal imaging, you can see 5 to 7 years ahead where the breast cancer process is going and, accordingly, choose treatment methods for it and monitor it. This applies to the gastrointestinal tract, thermal navigation of a brain tumor, and so on. Thank you very much for your attention.